Hello everyone and welcome to today's Mondac webinar in association with K-Law discussing non-fungible tokens, legality, money laundering and intellectual property. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm joined by a brilliant panel to take us through today's discussion. Ayush Agarwala heads for dispute practice in the Mumbai office of K-Law. With a career spanning almost 14 years, Ayush has vast experience in international and domestic disputes, white-collar crimes, and insolvency and bankruptcy. He has advised several corporate powerhouses and multinational companies, both domestic and international, spanning various industries and sectors. He has extensive experience in various sectors, which include technology, shareholder disputes, infrastructure, and energy. Gautam KM is an associate partner at K-Law in the IP and tech practice. He is an experienced legal professional with about 13 years of experience working in the broadcast media and technology industry. He has worked in leading media channels, Fortune 500 companies, and law firms specializing in media, entertainment, and technology laws, such as Infosys Technologies, Cognizant Technology Solutions, Disney Star, and Sony Pictures. Now, before I hand over to the panel, a quick housekeeping item. You can submit questions to our panel by typing them into the questions pane of the toolbar on the right-hand side of your page. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible during our Q&A session, but please do reach out afterwards for any additional information you may require. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Ayush and Gautam to begin. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever everyone's joining. Our topic for today's discussion is on non-fungible tokens, the legality from an Indian law perspective, surrounding money laundering and IP, with, being the specific focus. Before we start off, I would like to give you all an overview of what our presentation is going to be about and how Ayush and I will be taking all of you through it. So we would start off with an introduction to what NFTs are, how do you create NFTs, what are the characteristics of NFTs, and what could constitute works which could be used to create these NFTs. Then we would be moving on to technology supporting the NFTs in the context of what kind of technology needs to be used to create, to mint, and to list these NFTs. So once we have a slightly clearer picture on NFTs and the technology supporting these NFTs, we will move on from an Indian law perspective to the laws that are applicable. Starting off with the copyright laws and NFTs, moving on to trademark laws and NFTs, considering the stakeholders who would be involved for NFTs. We would also touch upon laws governing intermediaries from a tech law perspective. And then we will move on to the contracts perspective between creators, platforms, and the smart contract technology that would be there for NFTs, and the laws, again, which would govern these smart contracts. Then we would move on to the money laundering aspect from an Indian PMLA standpoint and how that plays out with NFTs and cryptocurrency. And lastly, we would close with the legal lacuna that is there currently in the Indian legal system from an NFT perspective. All right, so to begin with, we can move to the next slide. I will start off with an introduction to what NFTs are, and before I begin about NFTs, I would like to just point out prior to the digital era that we are in, NFTs were present in a very different, tangible manner. So pre-online era, I'm sure all of us have done this at some point in time, of collecting coins, stamps, or it could even be baseball cards, cricket cards, any of these kind of tangible items that we would collect, which would have some sort of value based on their scarcity or their grade, or the relevance. And these tangible items would have some value attached to it, which could be traded between two people for value. So in the pre-online era, this is something which was prevalent, which now in the digital era we can equate it to what an NFT could be. So keeping this context in mind, I will get down to what exactly is an NFT. An NFT is nothing but a data unit, which is stored on a digital ledger, or what we would call DLT in the NFT space, such as blockchain. So this can be characterized as a digital asset, and NFT can be characterized as a digital asset of an original piece of work. So an NFT is not necessarily the work itself. It's just a token which guarantees ownership of the digital work or of the physical work. So that's essentially what, in short, what an NFT is. NFTs, the next question is, which comes to the mind, is what can be created as into an NFT. So like I said, an NFT is just a digital token or a digital unit of an original work. So what can you create as into an NFT? So there is no limit to what can be converted into an NFT. It could be a painting, it could be a literary work, it could be a cinematograph film, it could be photography, it could be even quotes, tweets, memes. There is absolutely no end to what can be created into an NFT. It's just that you need to be mindful of certain aspects, which we will touch upon later on in the seminar. From a legal standpoint, from a copyright standpoint, from a trademark law standpoint, when you are using any work to create it into an NFT. So moving on, we will now touch upon what are the different types of NFTs, right? Like I was saying, an NFT is a digital unit, it's a digital unit of a work. So what are the types of NFTs? So NFTs can be looked into from two standpoints. One is NFT, which is the type of NFT which is asset based, and the type of NFT which is based on the storage mechanism. So under the asset based NFTs, we have digital NFTs, and we have what we call utility of digital NFTs. So I will first talk about what digital NFTs stand for. So essentially, and I will probably give you examples for a better understanding of what these digital NFTs or what utility digital NFTs could classify as. So digital NFTs are nothing but a digital version of a physical asset. Like for example, if I have painted a picture, I digitize that picture and convert that into an NFT by creating an online or digitized token of that particular asset, digital asset that I own or control. That essentially would be a digital NFT. But it's not just limited to the digital aspect. We can also transfer or create an NFT which would control ownership over a physical asset. For example, a car, right? I can create an NFT over a physical asset such as a car and trade that NFT, whereby I transfer the physical ownership of the car from myself to another person who's buying my NFT. So these are called utility of digital NFTs. Now, when we move on to NFTs which are classified basis storage, we have two types, which is on-chain NFTs and off-chain NFTs. Like I said, NFTs are nothing but digital units which are stored on a particular digital ledger, which is a blockchain, which we will be detailing. We will be getting into further details further on in this presentation. But just to give you an overview of how these are classified, what on-chain and off-chain NFTs are essentially, so the digital token, which is created when you create an NFT, stays on the blockchain. But what happens about the original or the work? So when an individual does purchase an NFT, while they're purchasing the token, they're also purchasing the digital ownership of the digital or physical asset. So where is that asset, right? So these assets can also, other than the token being generated and vesting on the blockchain technology or the digital ledger, you would also have the asset either on-chain or off-chain. So that is essentially the digital asset, which is, let's say, for the sake of example, I would take a painting as an example again, where the painting is essentially, I've created a painting which I have stored on my or which I have uploaded onto my onto a cloud server or onto my website. So it is not necessarily on the blockchain where the asset lies. So when I do create an NFT, I am essentially going to give a link to my website or to the cloud where I have stored the NFT, where I've stored the physical asset or the digital asset of the work. I would give a link on the digital ledger or the blockchain. So when somebody is buying my NFT, they have access to that particular code or that particular website link, which will lead them back to the asset, which is converted into the NFT. So that's the most common way of storing the asset is to keep it off chain, essentially either through a different website or on a cloud server. Now the problem with that is that if let's say the website goes down or there is a break in the link, the person buying the NFT is only left with a digital token and the asset is nowhere in picture. So the other way of doing it, and this is not a very common way that we have seen, is to store the asset on the blockchain itself. And how do you do that? Is typically when you do create a digital token, there is something called as a smart contract which is generated between the creator and the platform, which the smart contract typically has all the details of the token created, the details of the work, the creator's name, all of that. So here we would have the option to upload the work on the chain itself. So the link which gets generated on the chain as the link of the work essentially is on the chain itself. So when somebody buys the asset, the link which is provided essentially pops up the work itself. So it doesn't lead you to a different website or a different cloud storage. It essentially opens up on the blockchain itself or on the website itself where the NFT resides. So that's about the types of NFTs. If we were to talk about the characteristics of an NFT, as the abbreviation of an NFT goes, it's a non-fungible token, which essentially means that once an NFT is created, it cannot be modified or it cannot be it cannot be changed in any manner. So it's not fungible. Where unlike fungible, which fungible items where you can exchange or change the token, the item, in an NFT, this manner of exchange or this manner of changing is something which is not possible. So once a token is generated, that is sacrosanct to the respective work where it is linked to. It also acts as a certificate of originality. So once you do create an NFT, it does give you a sense. It does give you an ownership over the physical or the digital asset, the underlying asset. So that it acts as a certificate that you are the original owner of that asset. However, there are certain complications to that where while it may be a physical or digital ownership of the asset, but there are certain aspects where if it's a copyrightable work, it's not necessary that you own the copyright over it as well. So which I will get into when we talk about copyrights and NFTs. And the third part or the characteristic of an NFT is the metadata that gets stored when you create the NFT, which is essentially the details of the underlying work in terms of what is the work, who's the author, where is it stored, what is the value of the underlying asset. So all of this is the metadata which I was telling you gets stored onto the blockchain as well. So that's a brief introduction to the NFTs. I think we can move to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to Ayush to take you through the blockchain technology and smart contracts.
Thanks. Can we shift to the other slide, please? Quickly moving on. So the technology that support NFT, largely there are two technologies. You have the blockchain, and then you have the smart contracts, the blockchain on which the NFT is created or is stored, and smart contracts, which technically is underlying contract for any transaction relating to the NFT. So what is a blockchain? Very simply put, it is a software which stores data, or a software which stores a ledger of information. It is stored in a block. If I could even pictorially show it to you all or make it, and you'll imagine it, the information is stored in a block, which is then instead of being stored in one particular server, is stored on a P2P network. Therefore, the blockchain technically, which is saved on a P2P server, and there's a record of the transaction, is then in multiple servers and not in one server. I think that is the most essential feature of the blockchain, because then it makes it really difficult for that to be tampered with. And therefore, it is also called the decentralized ledger technology. And as I mentioned, once the data is recorded in a blockchain, it becomes effectively very, very difficult to change it. Why does it become difficult to change it? I think the answer to that lies in us understanding how exactly a blockchain functions. Now, each blockchain contains in it three essential features. One is the data itself that you want to store on the blockchain. The second is a hash. And the third is the hash of the previous block. The data is self-explanatory. It's the data that you want to store. What is a hash? A hash is like a fingerprint. It provides identity to a block. So when a new block is created, it creates a new hash, and the hash is identified by a number that is associated with the block. So for example, if I sell 1 Bitcoin to Gotham, a new block is created containing the details of the transaction between Gotham and me. This new block will not only contain the details of the transaction, it will contain a new hash that is created for the block that is now, which talks about the transaction with Gotham, and it contains details of the previous hash of the previous block, that is the block that contained the details of the transaction when the Bitcoin remained with me. And therefore, it is easier to track back the history of the transaction relating to that 1 Bitcoin. It helps also identifying So in cases, and this is exactly where I think people talk about how easy it is in case of a blockchain technology or in cases of transactions involving cryptocurrency to identify the history of the transactions. And because new chains are created, new chains are created, the name blockchain has come about. Blockchains keep continuing, keep evolving over a period of time. And therefore now you have something called a smart contract, which can be stored into a blockchain. Now, what is a smart contract? A smart contract essentially, actually, let me take a step back. A smart contract is not a traditional contract in the sense that we understand it. It is a program. It is a series of codes. It follows the if and then principle and is largely just to facilitate a contract or facilitate a transaction. What is the if and then principle? The program essentially recognizes that if an event were to happen, then the transaction is to be concluded. So if I receive $10, or if I receive 10 Bitcoins for a particular artwork, which is an NFT, then that NFT is to be transferred to the buyer. In very layman, that is what Bitcoin, that is what a smart contract is. So another example for that is if I sell an NFT on the if I sell an NFT, you can also embed various terms of it to make it a little more complicated. So if I sell an NFT of say an artwork, and in the contract I can embed that 10% royalty from all future sales of this NFT have to be paid back to me. Therefore, as per the smart contract, every time there's a future sale of this NFT, there'll be 10% of that 10% of the transaction value then, which will be transferred to me as royalty. Smart contracts actually act as an escrow account. So when money is transferred, so if currency has to be transferred or cryptocurrency has to be transferred, the cryptocurrency is actually stored in the smart contract as in an escrow, deposited in the smart contract in an escrow, and then is moved, and then upon the happening of the event is then transferred to the seller. Now, apart from the smart contract, also, as I said, blockchains have been evolving. So apart from smart contracts, you also have NFTs now that can be stored on a blockchain. That is the on-chain NFT that Gautam had referred to. So you have situations now for the transaction of an NFT, the NFT itself, the underlying asset itself can be stored on the blockchain. So in an off-chain model, the asset is not sold by way of, is not sold through the blockchain. All that you sell is the NFT itself or the right to a particular asset through the tokens. However, in an on-chain NFT, the underlying asset is also sold. So that is stored on the blockchain. So say, for example, there's a picture that there's a painting that you've drawn or a painting that you own, a digital painting. That digital painting can then be embedded or stored on the blockchain and is transferred along with the NFT. That is an on-chain NFT. Now, three essential features of a blockchain, just to quickly summarize this. One, they're immutable. Immutable basically means they cannot be tampered with. Well, we live in a digital age. We live in the age of technology. I don't think anything is really immune, but a blockchain is extremely, extremely difficult to tamper with. The reason being, one of the major reasons for that being the P2P servers that it is stored on. So every time there is somebody tries to tamper with one block, all the servers get a notification, and only if all the servers approve of whatever of the changes that are being made to that block, will that be recognized at all? So therefore, it is not very easy to tamper with the blockchain, with the blockchain technology. Next, it is disintermediated. Like I mentioned, it is again on a P2P server, so it is not on one central server. And thirdly, it is transnational. Transnational, essentially, it's made life easier for all of us to transact or to do business across the world. That essentially are the features of blockchain. I think I'll give it back to Gautam to take us through the IP laws pertaining to NFTs.
Yeah, thank you, Ayush. We can move to the next slide. All right, so now moving to the intellectual property laws, which are relevant from an NFT standpoint. I will basically touch upon the copyright law and the trademark laws briefly, and I'll start off with the copyright laws. So before we get into NFTs and how copyrights impact NFTs, I'll just take a short while to discuss what are the copyright laws in India, at least. And to start off with, so copyright as such is an expression of an idea, which could be for various works in the nature of a literary work, in the nature of a dramatic work, in the nature of a musical work, an artistic work, a sound recording, or a cinematograph film. So these are typically the works in which copyrights subsist. Now, under the copyright law, the presumption is that an idea cannot be copyrighted. However, an expression of the idea can be copyrighted. So what does this mean? Essentially, if I were to, have a script or have, a painting in mind, I can't, because I've thought about the painting or I've thought of the literary work, it doesn't mean I automatically get the copyright over it. However, when I translate that into I draw that painting, or I write down the script into a written format, that is when, and that is when I actually can claim copyright ownership over it. So it has to be fixed in a tangible form for me to claim copyright ownership. So does the law require for a copyright to be registered? No, it doesn't. At least, the moment it is created or fixed in a tangible form, the copyright ownership rests in the person who created it. However, there are certain situations where the ownership may not necessarily rest in the person who created it, which brings me to the distinction between who the author and an owner of the copyrighted work is. An author is always the person who creates the work. However, the person who creates the work need not necessarily always be the owner. If the author has created it at the instance of somebody else, like for example, if Ayush commissions me to paint or to make a painting, then while I might be the author of the painting, Ayush should be the owner because he commissioned me. So all the rights of the copyright as such, which I will get to in the next slide, is something that would vest with Ayush, and I as an author would only have my author rights over the work. We can move to the next slide. So what exactly does a copyright owner have in terms of the work that has been created and which is owned by the copyright owner? So there are essentially the following rights that are available, which is one, the right to issue copies of the work to the public, right to reproduce that work and store it by electronic means, the right to communicate the work to the public, right to make a derivative work of the original work, and certain moral rights, which are essentially rights which are vested in an author who has actually created the work, which protects him, or rather gives him the right to be credited and the right to claim damages in case of any distortion or mutilation of the work. Now, if I were to bring this into the context of NFTs, so how does copyright law, impact NFTs? Well, NFTs as such are not copyrightable works itself. NFTs are nothing but a token or a digital unit. So there is no copyright protection over an NFT. However, the NFT which represents the underlying asset, which is a work, could be copyrightable. So what needs to be kept in mind when somebody is creating an NFT from a copyright standpoint is that, do you have the right to create an NFT by using the original work, which could be protected by copyright laws? And essentially, by creating an NFT from an original work, are you in any way infringing upon these 5 to 6 rights of the copyright owner? The short point is yes, you would be if you do not have the rights to the underlying asset or the underlying work. If you do not have the right to create an NFT, you would essentially be infringing upon either a right to reproduce. So when I'm creating an NFT, I have to create a digitized version of the work. So I am actually the physical work, I am digitizing it or storing it by an electronic means, which is a right given to the copyright owner. So in which case, if I do not have the right to do that, I would be infringing upon the rights of the owner. Similarly, when I list this NFT for sale, once I go through the whole process of minting the NFT and listing that NFT for sale on an NFT marketplace, I am communicating that work to the public. So in other words, I'm again stepping on the shoes or stepping into the rights of a copyright owner. I'll just take a couple of examples here or a couple of cases here where it could give you some context to what I'm saying in terms of the copyright law and NFTs. So in the case of Miramax versus Tarantino wanted to create NFTs for one of his films, which was owned, or rather, he was the writer and director of that film. However, Miramax had commissioned him. Like I said, the author of a work need not necessarily always be the copyright owner. So Tarantino intended to, create NFTs over the scripts of his work, of the film. However, Miramax actually filed a lawsuit whereby they claimed that as copyright owners of the film, of the cinematograph film, they were the owners of the underlying works as well, which is the case because every time you commission someone to write a work, you are essentially the first owner. So that was their case. However, Tarantino had a defense because he had reserved certain rights, which were also which included publication of the script into other forms of literary works, not being a film or a cinematograph film or a derivative of cinematograph film. So he had retained certain rights or reserved certain rights, and his defense so far has been that he is only exercising his right to create a publicized version of his script via an NFT. While this case is sub judice, but yeah, this brings about this whole copyright owner versus author debate on whether an author, not being the owner of the original copyright, can create NFTs. Similarly, so with regard to the Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, while there's no case around this, but I just wanted to point this out because this brings into a question about creating derivative works. So the Bored Ape Yacht Club's NFT seller basically put up, created the NFT and put up a serum which was being sold along with the the artwork of Bored Ape Yacht Club, where the purchaser of the NFT could apply the serum onto the artwork that was there, which would essentially create a mutant ape from the Bored Ape. So thereby creating a fresh work. And this essentially is what we would classify as a derivative of the original work. So unless and until you have the right to do that, in this case, since it was their own NFT, they had the right to do it. But if you were to give these rights via these smart contracts, where you code these specific rights that you're giving the buyer, you need to ensure that you have these rights via a license or an assignment from the original copyright owner. The third case that I would like to study here is the Free Comb with Pagoda NFT, where this touched upon the moral rights of an author, where the seller created a digital version of this this work, where the buyer of the NFT was given the right to destroy the physical work, which the person giving that right, it was claimed that they did not have the right to do that, and that basically infringes upon the moral rights, which is essentially the right to be credited for the work, or the right against disparagement of the work. Right. So if there was a destruction which was happening of the original physical work, the author's work was being destroyed, which was claimed that was infringing upon the moral rights of the author. So these are a few case studies that are there, which gives us a sense of how copyright law and NFTs there is an interlink between. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So how can these issues be resolved? Because smart contracts, as Ayush mentioned, is just a piece of code, right? Because it just has metadata of what the NFT is, what the underlying work is, but it doesn't really necessarily capture a license or a copy or an assignment of the rights. And by giving a chance or transferring ownership of the underlying work by selling the NFT, it is opening up a lot of aspects of situations of infringement which can occur, which will go unnoticed because it's very difficult to track. The onus is on the author or the copyright owner to track these cases of infringement. So some situations where it can be resolved is by having license terms incorporated when you are actually selling these NFTs. So if you are a copyright owner and you want to keep track of the NFT you've created and the fact that there is no actual misuse of the work per se, whereby the copyrights are being infringed, license terms can be incorporated when these NFTs are being sold. So how can we do that? There are a few ways that this can be done, and while some of these are being implemented and used, I just thought we can just touch upon them briefly. One is, if there are certain specific uses that like for example, if you want to give the buyer a right to create a derivative work. Now this right can be licensed or assigned at the time of selling the NFT, and these terms or these rights as such can be coded into the smart contract of the NFT. One is that, or as and when the sale of the NFT occurs, there could be a pop-up which comes up in the form of a shrink wrap or a click wrap license agreement, where a detailed license terms or detailed assignment terms are put up, and the person purchasing the NFT can go through it and agree or not agree on those terms. NFT platform which is selling these NFTs can have terms of use or terms of license terms incorporated into the listing and the item description at the bottom, whereby they can have these specific terms mentioned as to what rights from a copyright standpoint is the buyer of the NFT getting. Lastly, if it is an off-chain NFT where the work is residing on a different platform or a different website, like for example the creator's website or the copyright owner's website, in which case the website there can have specific license terms which would apply, which can be made to apply in case of sale of NFTs. Now, moving on to a couple of aspects of doctrine of exhaustion and fair use, whether these would apply in the context of NFTs. So before I get into again how this would apply in the context of NFTs, I'll just quickly take a minute to explain what a doctrine of exhaustion is. So the doctrine of exhaustion is essentially so this applies from a distribution standpoint, that once the distribution has occurred, you cannot prevent further sale of a work. Now, whether this applies to NFTs. Now, an NFT is a digital unit of an original work. So technically, these it's not really a distribution of the work per se. It is essentially a sale or a sale of ownership of a physical or digital asset. So it's not it is not the sale of or it's not a distribution of a tangible object. So technically the doctrine of exhaustion would not apply. Now, coming to fair use are your safe harbor provisions. Essentially, there have been instances of claim of fair use where a product was being sold as an NFT, whereby the seller claimed that it was just a criticism or review of a product, whereby they were criticizing or reviewing the product that they created into an NFT. Now, why I would feel that this falls foul of the fair use provisions is for a few reasons. One, like I had mentioned, when you create an NFT, a copyright is a bundle of rights, like I mentioned, which gives a whole bunch of rights to a copyright owner. So the moment you are actually creating an NFT, you are storing it by electronic means, you're communicating it to the public, you could be creating derivative rights. So there are various acts that you're doing which are intrinsically vesting with the copyright owner. So unless and until you have the right to do that, you are, so to speak, infringing upon those rights. So fair use provisions in that sense would not apply. And lastly, you are, at the end of the day, an NFT, when you are selling or trading an NFT, you are monetizing, you are commercializing on that particular asset. So that's where I feel that any defense of fair use would not apply. We can move on to the next slide. So I'll quickly talk about trademark laws and NFTs. So similarly, trademarks are essentially a protection granted to a brand or an individual to protect his or her or the company's goods and services and the trade of those goods and services. It could be a name, it could be a logo, it could be an artistic work which is capable of being registered as a trademark. So these trademarks are something which, unlike copyrights, needs to be registered to claim the benefit of infringement. However, even an unregistered mark in use you can file a passing off claim if there is an instance of passing off. Now, how does this apply in the context of NFTs? NFTs while it is the underlying work is necessarily a physical work. However, like I mentioned at the beginning of the seminar, there is no end to what can be created as an NFT. A quote, a brand name, it can also be created as an NFT, depending if it has value and it can be stored in a digital manner. You can even use a brand name as an NFT. Now, there are several cases that are pending, especially, and this is more from a US standpoint, where we've seen where, I can give these a few examples where, in the case of Yuga Labs versus Rider Rips, the issue essentially was that Yuga Labs is essentially the owner of the what we were speaking about, Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT. So they are the owners of the BAYC NFT. What Rider Rips did was they created an NFT which said Rider Rips Bored Ape Yacht Club, which Yuga Labs, of course, filed a case for not just them using their NFT. However, they also claimed a trademark infringement because the BAYC was a registered trademark of Yuga Labs. So these are the instances where trademarks can also, there can be an interplay of trademarks with NFTs. Similarly, in the Nike versus StockX, essentially, and here is where the doctrine of exhaustion, which I was talking about earlier, of distribution, was applied, where essentially StockX was selling Nike sneakers, or rather, they were selling NFTs, whereby the buyers of those NFTs got these tokens, which could be redeemed. And these are what we would typically call as utility or phygital NFTs, where these tokens could be redeemed to actually purchase Nike sneakers. So Nike actually filed a case for infringement, whereby they stated that StockX was using the Nike mark illegally by creating an NFT to sell the Nike sneakers. Now, what StockX defense has been is that what they are selling is not the brand per se. It's just a token whereby those tokens can be redeemed to buy the sneakers. And what they stated was, once Nike actually sold the inventory of those particular sneakers, the doctrine of exhaustion applies, because the distribution has happened, and once sold, they cannot claim infringement. While this again is still under is sub judice, we will need to see how this comes about. Now, I'll quickly talk about cyber squatting, since we have a short time left. I'll just talk about cyber squatting. That's another case where where essentially what is cyber squatting is, cyber squatting is nothing but the practice of registering a domain name that that is likely to be acquired by an individual, or that is there of an individual, just to frustrate that individual. So in this case of Morgan Stanley versus Joseph Massey, Morgan Stanley filed a case whereby Joseph Massey was essentially selling NFTs in the name of Morgan Stanley, which said NFT Morgan Stanley. So just to frustrate the brand, Joseph Massey actually registered a domain by the name NFT Stanley, morganstanley.com. This was just to frustrate Morgan Stanley. Of course, eventually they were asked to take down the domain because it was a case of cyber squatting. And now, of course, we need to wait and watch what happens on the NFT aspect. So that's about trademarks. I'll quickly talk about intermediaries, and I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So from an Indian law standpoint, how does intermediaries, the intermediary guidelines which come under the Information Technology Act, apply when it comes to NFTs. While this does not technically apply to the creator of the NFT or the buyer investor of the NFT, however, this could apply to the platforms which are being used to create to create and to sell NFTs. So, like we mentioned earlier, for blockchain technology, there's a platform which provides the technology to create the NFT, or rather to mint the NFT onto the blockchain. Or similarly, there is, once the NFT is listed for sale, there is a platform which acts as a marketplace to sell that NFT. Now, do these platforms classify as intermediaries? It can be yes and no. Now, if the platform is strictly acting as a platform where a seller and a buyer can interact, whereby the seller can list the NFT and the buyer can buy the NFT by linking their digital wallets, it can be argued that the platform is strictly acting as an intermediary by giving them this marketplace. And if you would see the intermediary guidelines, marketplaces have been exempted and do have fair use or safe harbor for any infringement, for any any claims, any sort of claims that a third party may have against the person uploading the content, or in this case the NFT. So while they are exempted from liability, however, there are even an intermediary has certain obligations which they need to comply with in terms of having a terms of use in place, which clearly identifies what are the do's and don'ts in terms of what the uploader can do, can't do. For example, they have to make sure that they have informed their users that they can't be uploading infringing content. They cannot be uploading content which could be defamatory in nature or could be blasphemous in nature. And similarly, if any such claim does come, the intermediary would need to have takedown mechanisms in place, which essentially aids in the takedown of any infringing content or any claimed content, in this case, NFTs. So those obligations would apply. However, a platform need not necessarily always be an intermediary if they are not performing the functions of an intermediary. And when I say not performing the functions of an intermediary, I mean, for example, if the platform themselves are minting the NFTs, right, they cannot claim the defense of an intermediary. So these are certain exceptions that are there. Coming to Consumer Protection Act, over the years, at least in India, the government has been very proactive in building a robust consumer protection mechanism for goods and services. Now, NFTs can be classified as goods, so they would come within the regime of the Consumer Protection Act, read with the rules of 2020, as the underlying or the underlying asset could be considered to be movable property when it's sold from one person to another person. So there are certain trade practices that need to be followed by intermediaries when they are selling NFTs on their platform, which essentially entails ensuring that they have a refund policy in place, an invoice is granted or an invoice is generated as and when a sale occurs. So these are obligations which would apply to the intermediary, and if the intermediary is not able to comply with these obligations, there could be claims of unfair trade practices being carried out by these marketplaces. So in brief, these were the laws around IT and intellectual property. I'll now hand it over to Ayush to summarize the remaining slides.
Thanks. Just now, I think we can move to the next slide, moving on to the legality of NFTs and the laws surrounding NFTs and enforcement of any dispute that arises over there. To put it simply, are NFTs illegal? Is there anything which says that you cannot trade in NFTs or you cannot create NFTs? There is nothing of that sort in India as of now. There is no specific law which either declares it as illegal or even identifies it as illegal. The law is quite quite silent on the legality. In fact, on the contrary, there is a Supreme Court judgment which was passed in the case of Internet and the Mobile Association of India, which is as recent as 2020, where they seem to, in some way, while not NFTs in particular, but while dealing with the issue of cryptocurrencies and whether they can be considered as lawful consideration for a contract, they did seem to suggest that that payments made through cryptocurrencies could be considered as valid and lawful consideration, as they are capable of being considered as intangible properties or goods. So there is some sanctity that has been given to this entire concept of NFTs, cryptocurrencies, though there's nothing specific in writing yet. We should be aware, though, that the Indian government has time and again tried different ways to try and say declare them as illegal. They have issued public notices in the past where they warned the public at large and financial institutions of the dangers of using cryptocurrencies. They have issued circulars where they have restricted financial institutions and banks from in any manner working with companies or entities or persons who are involved in the trade of NFTs, cryptocurrencies, etc. Though that was later struck down by the Supreme Court in the very case of Internet Mobile that I spoke of earlier. So it isn't foolproof. We don't know what the government is really up to in India. But as things stand today, there is nothing that stops us from trading in NFTs. There is nothing that stops anybody from carrying out any transaction in relation to NFTs. So that being said, what happens if there is a breach of a transaction involving NFTs? Can we go back to the previous slide, please? What happens if there's a breach? What happens if a transaction goes bad? Say there's fraud, for example. What happens then? What do you do? What does one do? You have as I mentioned earlier, you have the underlying basis of any transaction relating to NFT is a smart contract. Now, is a smart contract recognized under the Indian Contract Act? The Indian Contract Act is the mother act which recognizes all contractual disputes, which also talks about what would constitute a contract. When would there be a breach of a contract? What would be a breach of a contract? If I'm to strictly read the language of the Indian Contract Act, all that it requires is there has to be an offer, there has to be an acceptance, and there has to be a legal consideration. As far as I'm concerned, and that is enough for it to constitute a contract. And therefore, if there is any breach, you could possibly take use of the Indian Contract Act and you could file a lawsuit in India, even a lawsuit in India, claiming for there to be a breach of the contract. Now, how could there be a breach of a smart contract? As we mentioned earlier, the smart contract and this entire blockchain concept seems to be quite foolproof. But let's assume a situation where there are certain terms prescribed. Now, apart from the smart contract, in a transaction, let's understand how this transaction plays out. Right? If you are to buy an underlying asset through the NFT, the seller, apart from the smart contract, could also have certain terms that are mentioned in mentioned on his website or mentioned at the portal at the time of the sale. which could restrict the use of a particular asset in a particular manner. So if the eventual buyer tomorrow decides to overreach the terms on the basis of which the sale was made to him of the asset, there is a potential lawsuit that can be filed. That's number one. Number two, like I said, there have been cases in the past where, there have been, we live in a digital world. You never know when there could be any kind of tampering. You never know when someone could tamper with a smart contract at some point or a blockchain. So in any of these cases, you can approach the Indian courts talking about a breach of a contract. Sale of Goods Act, the Sale of Goods Act in India, it talks about the legality of what is considered to be a sale and a purchase of a good. What happens when there is any kind of a breach in the terms of that sale. That also gets attracted over here. NFTs, strictly by the term of strictly going by the definition of goods under the Sale of Goods Act, would qualify as a good as goods for the purpose of that act. If we can move on, please. Now, what happens if there is, before we move into money laundering, my next slide is on money laundering, but what happens if there is a fraud? We've seen cases worldwide where NFTs have been used to perpetrate fraud. I think there's some case off the top of my head. There's a case in the US where investments were invited into by way of NFTs, for a gaming company, and the moment the investment started coming in, the person on the other side who created the NFT, the person had just vanished. So he'd taken the money and he vanished. So what happens then? You have the Indian Penal Code. It is a criminal offense. You can invoke those cases you can invoke sections and provisions of the Indian Penal Code, calling it to be cheating or a breach of trust. These are cases. That's another action that you can take, which would be which would actually be penal in nature. Now, moving on to money laundering, I'm going to be quick because I realize we're short on time. Money laundering, which as a case of money laundering ever happened through either cryptocurrencies or NFTs. Well, in India, there is one company that is being investigated. I think over the last couple of years, there is an investigation ongoing. We don't know what the outcome of that investigation is. But NFTs, by their very nature, can be used to launder money. The simple reason being, there is no, if your underlying asset is, say, for example, an art or an artwork, how do you value artwork? It's intangible in nature, and there could be any value that is assigned to that artwork. And it is very easy then to launder money by overvaluing it or overpricing a particular asset and selling it to somebody who then, which is just basically a manner of laundering money through various systems. So what does India have in place to counter such a scheme of money laundering? As I mentioned in the past, the government has tried to warn people of the dangers of using cryptocurrencies, which is unregulated for all practical purposes, at least theoretical purposes, actually not practical purposes, but theoretical purposes. The RBI did try directing financial institutions and banks to not deal with platforms that deal in NFTs and cryptocurrencies. Like I mentioned, that has been struck down. So there's really not a lot that has been done, but the primary, most recently, about 10 days back, on the 5th or 7th of March, about 15 days back, The government has now come out with a notification under India's primary Prevention of Money Laundering Act to bring within its fold platforms like intermediaries, like Gautam had mentioned earlier. So your cryptocurrency platforms, your NFT platforms, and any other platform that in any manner deals with NFTs will now come within the fold of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. What is the impact of something of that sort? They are now termed as reporting agencies. What do they do as reporting agencies? There are a set of obligations cast on them. These obligations could be that there are certain quick obligations there are obligations cast on them. They have to conduct due diligence on the transactions that are being conducted on their websites or through their platforms. They have to conduct due diligence of the people using their platform. There has to be a proper KYC, and they are all liable if anything of this sort is not done. This is one manner in which they're trying to keep a check of the kind of transactions that are happening through the various platforms and ensuring there is no money, and to ensure that there is no money laundering. But how effective is this going to be? We don't know yet. Hopefully, we will see. We will get to know in the coming days or in the coming months as to how effective this notification is with them being brought under the purview of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. I think with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We've run over time a little bit, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, Mondak. I think we'll be open to questions, but before that, I just would like to thank Mondak and our team over here at K-Law, Arushi and Hima, who helped us out with putting together this presentation today. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Ayush. That was an incredibly detailed and informative presentation today from Gautam and Ayush. Thank you very much for that. I think we've just gone over time for questions, but rest assured, any of your questions that you sent in, and we have had a number of questions in, will be sent on to the team who will be in touch. And we encourage you to please do get in touch with K-Law, to get in touch with Gautam and Ayush as well for any questions that you need answered. But thank you very much to you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. We hope that we can see you again. But for now, I will say goodbye and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.